This is We the Sales Engineers Podcast, show 183.
Welcome to We the SEs Podcast, the show for sales engineers by sales engineers with your host, Ramsey Majaba.
What's up, SE Nation? Welcome back to another episode. I am your host, Ramsey Majaba, and my invisible host, his name is Benny Kunungu, or the Beard, as he's affectionately known in this part of town. And today we have a fellow Canadian who's on the show, and we talk about moving from a leadership position in a different field, in this case IT, to become an individual contributor as a sales engineer, and then moving up the ranks. When I first became a sales engineer, I didn't know much about the industry, to be honest. Because I was in one company for around 5 years, I didn't know what else was going on in the world. So I became a sales engineer. I didn't know what was going on. So it's interesting to talk to someone who's moved from their role to a sales engineering role at a more mature age, because that gives them a leg up. They're more aware of what's going on. So, and why would they do that, going from a leadership position to a sales engineer position? So we talked to our guest, Joel Duffield, today, and it was a great conversation with a fellow Canadian. So let's just jump into the show. Good morning, Joel. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you guys doing?
I'm excited to have you here because you're one of the first listeners. We were just saying that you're kind of an early adopter of We the SEs. So I appreciate you being here. And we've been incommunicado for a few years now. You're finally on the podcast.
I'm finally on the podcast. I wish I had a great story of the first time I listened to your podcast, because it was a very long time ago. It was fairly early, but I have absolutely no memory of it. So
it's okay. I
no
try to
story.
block out these days as well. Like the early days were just, oh my God. It's surprising how many people gave me a chance, like John Kerr and Peter Cohen, like episode 16, 17, like, why are you even talking to me right now? And I didn't even know how to ask questions, but I'm happy you're here. And
it's like going back and watching your very early demos. It's like, what was I doing and why did anyone let me stick around?
Yeah. So you're kind of a recent SE. You've been doing this for almost 2 years.
No, so I started in November of 2020, and it is now September. So just under a year that I've been actually an SE. Yeah.
So what were you doing before?
So before that, most recently before that, I was an IT manager. And then before that, I'd been a sysadmin. So I've been a, standard internal IT sysadmin type job for like 15 years before that.
Okay. Wow. That's a long time.
And no big companies. Like most of that time I was like a sysadmin at like our town of like 20,000 people. So pretty small, and then now dropped into, the enterprise life. So a lot of changes in a lot of different ways.
Did you work with vendors?
No. So we were so small. So this was actually the funny thing. We were so small that nobody gave us time of day. So I very infrequently actually got to talk to any SEs. I definitely never had any visit me or anything like that. So I, in the whole time, I might have interacted with like 3. And that was it. So until such time that I had come across your podcast, like I knew it existed, kind of, sort of, but I definitely hadn't interacted with many in any meaningful way.
You knew the role existed, not the podcast.
I knew the role existed. Yeah.
Okay. So how did you buy anything? Like, customers can't buy anything without sales engineers. How did you make decisions?
Myself, basically. Like when you're that small, right? Like most of our stuff we would buy, a big purchase for us was like $5,000. So we would buy, go do our research on our own. Like maybe a salesperson would even talk to us. Half the time they wouldn't even talk to us. They'd just be like, buy it through the website. And then, dealing through resellers, stuff like that with a lot of stuff we bought. But yeah, not many. I do remember a time, again, I was so small that they never offered me to this, but at an event once, I did meet a sales engineer from BlackBerry who solved a problem I had been dealing with for like the longest time in their MDM. And he's like, oh, you just do this. And I'm like, okay, well, where have people like you been the entire time I've trying to solve these problems? So yeah, I knew of it, but definitely it was mostly like a go figure it out for yourself, because no one wants to spend any money on selling you anything. So
okay. Did that leave a bad taste in your mouth?
I mean, it's all I knew, right? I think if I'd come from places where I was used to having my handheld and people doing all these things for me and that kind of thing, I didn't really know any better at the time. Now I look back and I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of things that would have been a lot easier in my life if I had the help of a sales engineer. But I mean, I think, that was the kind of market I was in, right? I was definitely at the lower end of SMB. Like, I don't know, we probably had like 100 users. That was it. So yeah, nobody cared if we bought something that much.
Okay.
Fair. So I guess with that, if you don't mind us asking, what kind of led you towards the sales engineering pipeline or pathway for your career?
So this is why I wish I remembered the story, because it was Ramsey and his podcast. How I found it, yes, it was you. How I found it, I have absolutely no idea. The only thing I can think is because Ramsey and I live somewhat close together. We live on opposite sides of Algonquin Park in Ontario, Canada. And so probably it was like, hey, here's a guy like in tech who has a podcast that's like somewhat near me. But I mean, no, that was it. Before I started listening to podcasts, there's no way that it was something I would have ever done. And then what really hooked me on it would have been, well, one, everyone, I think they still do for the most part on the podcast, but everyone at the time who was coming on the podcast was talking about it was like, the best job that they'd ever had, and that no one talked about it. And then the other thing for me, honestly, is, living basically in the middle of nowhere. If I want a remote job, at the time, it was one of the only remote jobs that was kind of widely available, right? It was pretty common even back then for sales engineers to be remote. And I thought, this is something I can do without moving. I didn't want to move. I didn't want to move to a big city or anything like that. And so to really, if I was ever going to change my career, it was kind of one of the only things. So that's kind of what got me hooked on it. And then as I learned more and more, I'm definitely a talker in disc. I am definitely a very high I. So I like talking about things. And then eventually got to the point, even though I was very technical, that I'm like, you know what? I much prefer talking about this stuff than actually doing this stuff anymore. And that's when I decided, you know what, this is time to actually like make the switch and just start talking about all the technology and figuring out the problems, because that was the part I liked the most, rather than actually sitting down and, doing all the coding to make it actually work and then dealing with it breaking 25 times. So that's what led me to finally, make the switch and push me over the edge.
Okay. Benny has a question about being a talker, but before we get there, how has the role been? Has it been the best job you've ever had, or has it been a disappointment for you?
No, it has not been oversold. It has definitely not been oversold. If it sounds like the kind of job you'd want, I would say it pretty much matches what people say that it is. So no, I have not been let down about it in any way, shape, or form. I mean, I haven't done any traveling yet, so I've had this job through lockdown the entire time. So I've definitely never left my house to do this job yet. So we'll see when I actually start traveling and things like that, how I like that part. I think that'll all be good. But no, so far it matches up like exactly to what I thought it would be.
Yeah, a lot of people enjoy the travel part of it, and a lot of people don't. So like they end up just bunching, like, hey, you have to travel to Toronto. Let's meet with 10 customers in 1 week. That way I don't have to travel for another 3 months or something. It doesn't always work, but there depending on the salesperson you work with, there might be ways around it.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think we never traveled that much even before.
Okay.
So I think we're mostly, we'll go to conferences and stuff like that, but I'm definitely not in a role currently where I'm like a field sales engineer. So not that much traveling.
That makes sense. Something you mentioned a little bit earlier that was kind of cool to hear was that, you've always kind of naturally been a little bit more of a talker, a little bit more outgoing, I suppose. But then being kind of in those like sysadmin roles and excuse me, other more technical roles, not as conducive towards talking. Like you said, your head might be down kind of doing the code itself. Did you always suspect, I guess, that there was that more talk, like before you knew about the podcast and everything? Did you always suspect or kind of yearn for a more talkative role that still kind of had that technical component to it, or yeah, did you, and yeah, what was that like? Like it's such an opposite like contrast of skills, I guess, to be in one role but very much be suited for another. I'd imagine your brain would be worrying through all of that.
Yeah. So I think at the time, I don't think I clued into that for several years. I think I just, in an office, you talk to people, you're getting a lot of that. I think originally that pulled me towards management, the management track, as it seemed like that's a lot more like I enjoyed meetings, right? I'm one of these weird people that actually like going to meetings and just talking stuff out with people. And so I think it originally pulled me kind of in that direction because that seemed like another alternative to it where it was less, sitting at your desk for 6 hours, just clicking buttons for the whole time. And so, yeah, I think originally I went kind of that because I didn't know much else existed. And so then when this came up, I'm like, actually, well, this is a lot more of that part without any of the headaches of the management stuff.
Sure.
Considering you've kind of been promoted to a lead.
Well, yeah. I mean, I like the management stuff too, right? At the time where I was, I'm like, I don't know if I love the management. I've also learned that liking management also depends a lot on who your people are, where you are. There's a lot of variables in all of it, right?
So does this make you an extrovert?
I'm not sure. I've always wondered this. I don't actually know if I'm full on an extrovert. Because the funny thing is for a high I who likes to talk, I'm actually pretty shy in social situations. So I don't know where I fall on that. I think definitely for me, remote selling is like perfect because there's none of that on Zoom, right? You show up and the people are there and like you're either going to be super awkward just staring at them or you need to start talking. Whereas in a room full of people, you can kind of choose whether you go over to someone or not. So no, it's I haven't fully settled on that yet if I'm actually an extrovert or not.
Yeah, because like people who listen to the podcast think I'm an extrovert. Oh, you're reaching out to all these people. I'm totally not. Like I can tell that I'm an introvert because when I'm in a room of 100 people, I'm usually the first one to leave. Right.
Like, yeah, I would go 100% along with that. That's
yeah. So like I would stand there, try to talk to a couple of people, finally like, oh man, you know what? It's not. You can't even build any relationships. I enjoy building relationships one-on-one, right? Versus in a group of 100 people where everything's going to be shallow. You're not even going to get into a deep conversation. You're just gonna at some point you find out that this has been a waste of time. So I'm just like, you know what? I'm gonna go to sleep. And maybe I'll find 1 or 2 people tomorrow over breakfast. I'll sit with them and I'll talk to them. And that's how I think I know I'm an introvert. That and because, everybody else tells me. So like my family. Benny, are you an introvert or an extrovert?
So I'm more naturally introverted. So the scale that I kind of follow, the measure I follow is how do you find that you recharge, or where do you find your energy gets expended versus how do you recharge? So if you find that, amongst a crowd of people and whatnot, that's very energizing for you and you could be there forever, then you're more extroverted. Whereas if you find that you need to have your alone time to recharge, then you're more naturally introverted, which I'm more that way, but I'm very much a practiced extrovert in many respects. But that's kind of like if you really want to know what your natural way of being is, that's kind of what the way that I would recommend is to see how you recharge.
That's a good point. So going back to you, Joel, like about transitioning into sales engineering, you were a leader in IT. You're you're an expert, you're a master in that domain. And then you switched to a brand new role. So how did it go? How did it feel like going from being an expert and you knew everything to being a rookie?
Well, so that was a weird one because unlike definitely a lot of people, because I chose to make the switch, it didn't happen accidentally like it does with a lot of SEs. I also didn't actually land in something that at the time I felt was 100% in my wheelhouse, right? So it would have made sense for me on paper to become an SE in, cybersecurity or networking or something like that, because that was the world I was very much in. But I ended up in MarTech, which was kind of completely new. That made sense because I was brought in to be kind of the more technical member of the team, right? So helped out a lot with security reviews and dealing with, the IT folks on deals and all that kind of stuff. but definitely at the time made it a little more fish out of water, because it was not only a new job, but it was kind of a whole new industry too, so a whole new lingo and all that stuff. And then to make it extra fun, at the time it had been a team of 3, and 2 of the SCs had just left. So I came in with only 1 SC, basically pulling the entire weight of the company at the time, and so I had to get up to speed really fast. So it was a very fun and exciting couple of months, and I don't mean that sarcastically. It actually was fun and exciting, but it definitely was a little overwhelming as well.
So you're like the second SC on the team. There was one that didn't leave, or were you the one that didn't leave?
So no, there was 3 before I got here.
Okay.
And then 2 of them one had moved internally, one had gone to another company, like right as I came. So that's why I got hired to basically replace one of them. And so, yeah, there was, they scaled way down, and then we had to scale way back up. And then since then we've scaled up even more. But yeah, so that made it, there wasn't really a ramp period. I think on like my 3rd day, I was on a call because our main senior SE who was still here, like, had a sick day. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'm going on this call and just seeing what I can do.
So who helped you ramp up? Like, did you ramp up live in front of customers, it seems?
Somewhat, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, being a small company, right, we do have onboarding and stuff like that. But, a lot of it's still figuring things out yourself. Had a great manager at the time. I actually reported into the CRO. So that was interesting because although he wasn't, a sales engineering manager, and so there was some things missing from that. Luckily, I mean, having been listening to your guys' podcast and being in PSC and all that stuff, I didn't need so much the sales engineering stuff. I had a lot of backup on that part, but it was actually really cool coming in and having more of that influence from the management side of like sales itself. So that was kind of interesting. And then, yeah, just, reaching out, talking to other people internally. It's a very transparent, open company. I have a lot of Slack messages is probably how I learned most of the things that I learned. And then, coming from a very technical background, it's a lot of just banging on stuff, right? Not being worried to break things and just figuring it out. And then you have that last little bit that is breaking things in front of customers and learning that I'm not going to say that thing again, because that's actually not how it works. And I learned the hard way. So, you figure it out through lots of different ways.
Okay.
What, or if there were any, or did you have any sort of anxieties or anything before you jumped into that sales engineering role? Like now all of a sudden having to be more customer facing and whatnot. Did you have any of those concerns going in?
I mean, I did. I think my wife probably had more, as, switching careers in the middle of a pandemic, and going into something very different. It had been like a long time. I'd been at my previous job for 11 years. So I hadn't even been, used to moving around. So there was a lot there that was, a little putting myself out there. But as I said, I mean, from day one, it had been very exciting. I think I remember the moment, probably like 2 weeks in or something, right? I was on a call with a customer, presented them with some kind of thing that they hadn't thought of that they could do, and they loved the idea. And I'm like, right at that moment, I'm like, okay, no, this is what people are talking about right here. This is what I am here for, is this kind of thing. And I think that helped calm my nerves a little bit from that point of like, okay, no, I can do this. I can come up with things that, people haven't thought of before, and can help them out. So I'm not, completely in the wrong place.
Is there something you weren't ready for that we never talked about on the show here or PSC?
I think that there's a lot that happens, outside of the demo. I think that there's a lot that's talked about because that's the big shiny thing, right? I think that when it comes to actually the demos themselves, there's, that's covered fairly well. I think there's a lot of the mundane, like doing RFPs. It was definitely interesting being on the other side of RFPs, right? The other side of security reviews. I had made, security questionnaires that were pretty wicked, and now I had to fill them out. There was a lot of, chickens coming home to roost with that one. But I think those were the things. It was more the mundane things that don't get talked about so much, that honestly can be, a big time sink. And those are, more the things that don't get talked about because they're the normal day-to-day stuff, not the big flashy, we're standing in front of an audience, doing our little song and dance.
I think out of 183 episodes, we've talked maybe about demos 5-10 times. The rest is about like building relationships, and it's because the demos are fun. Everybody loves the demos, right? And you become an engineer because you get to design stuff, but no one tells you that you have to write reports about the things that you're designing. Like, why do I need to learn English? Like, I'm an immigrant, I don't care about English. I just go click a few buttons and we're good. But no, you have to write a report about it. Or you have to, if you work in support, you have to communicate with customers in a way that they understand what the problem is and you don't piss them off. Like, oh, you're an idiot, you typed this instead of that, right? So yeah, like I agree with you. There's every job, no matter what it is, there's so much that goes behind the scenes, I guess. Because how often are you meeting customers? How many hours during the day are you meeting customers? Can you think of that number, Joe?
So right now, I have a new role now. So I'm a lead solutions consultant, which basically means team lead. So I'm trying to actually get that number down, although that's always, fun in busy environments. But we're not directly aligned. We do, a pool, we support 5 or 6 AEs each. We'll probably do maybe 1 to 2 demos a day. And then the rest of the days are doing, everything else. So, exactly. So not that much. We're not doing back-to-back demos, that's for sure.
But that's like, well, a lot of inside sales engineers end up doing a lot more demos. But like when you're in your role, it's like 2 hours a day and it's an 8-hour day. What are you doing for the other 8 hours? You're not sitting on your thumbs or twiddling your thumbs. You're doing all the work that you have to do to get to do the demo.
Yeah, right? Exactly.
So yeah, that's not something we talk about. And it's the boring stuff. Nobody wants to hear about like, hey, I wrote an email to my sales guy to tell him like, you're an idiot because you sold the wrong thing, or you're amazing because you sold the right thing. Nobody wants to talk about that. Yeah. Okay, so that was kind of surprising. Why did you decide to go back into leadership?
So it was something actually that we had talked about from the very beginning. Later on in the interview process, I was obviously in a job where I was already a manager. And it was something where, because we didn't have that manager position, it was something they were thinking of, for the future, how are we going to do this? And so I had, conversations right off the beginning of, this is something I've done before. It's something we'll talk about. And then kind of keep talking about that, right? Keep it front of mind. If you want to go in a certain direction, like raise your hand, make that clear, keep talking about it. Obviously not in an annoying way, but know where you want to go and put that out there. I think the reason for me that I've chosen to go kind of towards that management track again is that I very much enjoy, the strategy, coming up with a new way that we're going to demo, coming up with a new system that we're going to implement to solve this problem, looking at, charts and graphs and all that kind of stuff, and talking to a lot of people internally to solve the problem that the team is having, right? So not just going off, and I don't love necessarily just going off and solving the problem for myself. I really enjoy solving this thing and then bringing it back to the group, and being like, hey, here's this new thing we discovered. Here's, an article that I wrote about it, so we don't have to redo this next time. All that kind of thing is kind of what drew me again back in that direction.
Go ahead, Ben. Go ahead. I've been hogging the mic. Go ahead.
No, you're right. Just while on the topic of leadership and kind of having done it before, and I guess like everything that comes along with it, was being the team lead for the SC team very different from your leadership experiences in the past, or was it extremely transferable from what you did before to what you're doing now?
It's a little bit of both. I think some of it's transferable. It's definitely a lot different. So when I was a manager before, I was again managing government. So it's a lot of, budgeting, policy, all that kind of stuff. In a fast scaling SaaS scale up, there's not, we have policy, but it's a lot less, like it was in government, where it's like, we're going to take the next 6 months to write this policy. It's like, okay, let's come up with something today and let's see what sticks. So I feel like now it's a lot more of dealing with the people, dealing with other people, getting problems sorted out in a much quicker fashion. Whereas before it was, very much that paper pusher manager, we're going to spend 6 months working on next year's budget. We're going to spend a couple months writing this massive 4-inch thick policy about something else. So I think those are where the differences lie kind of between the two roles. Definitely a lot of crossover, but kind of the way that it's implemented and the kinds of things you're actually outputting, I think, are very different.
Fair enough.
All right, so Benny stole my question. I have to come up with another one. And I'm talking, I think you wrote it ahead of time. I just don't read what you write. When right now you mentioned you report to the CRO, or at least at some point you reported to the CRO. How has the org structure changed, and why would the change happen?
Yeah, so the CRO thing, obviously happened before I got here, but my understanding is like there used to be a sales engineering manager, and they departed, and then it was kind of like, well, let's see what happens. So for the meantime, we rolled up to the CRO. So since then, we actually currently roll up to a director who's responsible for pre-sales in general. So that would include like the SC team, but also the SDR, BDR team, all that kind of thing. But that's still a director role. So there's still kind of this spot of it. At some point, it's going to make sense for there to be a manager. But, we're only a team of 5 today. So it's kind of at this point where it's like, it doesn't make sense necessarily for a full-time manager all the time. So we're kind of in a transition stage. But obviously, as we scale, we're kind of figuring out where that goes. But it is nice to have, as I said, it was amazing to have that experience of having a CRO as your boss and getting all the insight from them. But then also nice to have a manager that's a little more, lower level, a little closer to what your day-to-day job is. The thing I always used to say about when you have the CRO as your manager, no matter how much they tell you that, you can come to me with anything, any problems you have, whatever, you always have in your head, like, they're a really busy person. I don't want to bug them with this. And so having a manager that can be kind of, seems closer to your job and more in the day-to-day with you, I think also has its benefits. I think having seen both, it's kind of cool to have both. You can have the one that has, really great insight into the big picture, where the company is going, where they want to take it, and then also having more of the boots on the ground. What I hope I'm able to do today as kind of that team lead, where it's like, no, I totally understand what you're talking about, because this is literally happening to me as well, because I'm still on calls, but I can go and help you figure this problem out and come back with a solution.
Wouldn't the director report to the CRO right now?
Yeah.
Okay, so you still have access to the CRO.
Oh, definitely.
If you need anything, there's somebody else to deal with, like the paperwork, approving vacations or whatever, because I don't know, you have unlimited vacations. I don't know who does that.
But we actually have unlimited vacations that are not a lie, right? Most SaaS companies now have unlimited vacations, but if you go on something like Blind, there was a big thread about the other day, everyone's complaining it actually means no vacations at all. Whereas for us, I think we've actually got a pretty good split. It's unlimited vacation with a minimum of 3 weeks. So
okay.
I'm very happy for that. It's not the one where it's like unlimited vacation, but then you get there and realize no one takes vacation. If you take vacation, they all look at you dirty.
Yeah.
No, we actually do take vacation, and it's technically unlimited.
So what happens if you don't take the 3 weeks? You get fired?
I don't know yet. I don't know. I haven't come across that problem yet.
I think here in Canada, or maybe it's an Ontario thing, either Ontario or Canada, I think like it's legally mandated for you to have those 3 weeks minimum. So I think that much, I think they're going to need to, like, they would need to pay you out for, but then the rest past that is just whatever, just company policy. But I think only because we have the government mandate of mandated time off, the unlimited plans that we get have that minimum amount of time, whereas somewhere else in the States that might not have that same mandate, it's true unlimited, which also means, yeah, nobody takes vacation or get judged for taking 2 days off or whatever. Anyway, so you obviously sound very wise. You've experienced quite a bit in your times and whatnot. And just within a year of becoming a sales engineer, already kind of a team lead, which is super exciting. What would you say are some of your biggest aha moments that you've had over the last year, either within the context of a sales engineer or perhaps the team lead, that, I don't know, allowed you to become better in your role, which and was something perhaps that you didn't necessarily anticipate going into it?
So I think the first thing I learned is the amount of ums that I use in my sentences. And that's something I'm still trying to deal with. And they're like, I did it literally right after I said it. I said,
No, you didn't say you said
I said which is it's like the drawn out version of So I think I knew that I liked being in front of people and talking. I don't think I realized how hard that actually is to do well. I had done speaking at conferences and stuff like that, but to actually do it and to actually do it in a way where it's a little more measurable, right? Where you actually have to, you can tell if you convince someone to do something or not, whether or not they buy, is very interesting. There's a lot that goes into it that you don't realize at first. So just because you like to talk doesn't necessarily mean that out of the gate you're going to be a great sales engineer, great at convincing people to do things. So that was very interesting, and definitely have made a lot of progress on that, but still have a long way to go. And then I think the other thing is just very much how, especially not in so much the enterprise space, in more the mid-market and SMB space, how fast of turnarounds we're talking about with things, not having, again, coming from a background where things were a lot slower, not answering a question within the day is kind of a long time to take to answer a question, right? Versus, we'll talk about this in 2 weeks. And if you have an answer, like, that's awesome. So I love the fast paced, but it definitely takes some getting used to of, it's a different way you have to manage your time to be able to have that flex space in there, while also getting the bigger projects that you need done. So it's an interesting shift that I didn't so much think I was going to encounter.
Fair enough. I think it'll just get better with time as well. Just kind of as you get more familiar with the pace of things where you are now and just how things are done and how certain processes go to be, you'll find your ways that work. And I'm sure you'll find also your shortcuts you can take that you can't take given the context of your environment. So that's cool to hear.
Yeah, it's funny because the sooner you answer questions, the sooner you can close deals, as long as they're open questions. And the problem gets when you're in a smaller company and you can maybe get answers quicker. I'm in a bigger company and we're going back to that problem where I may have to ask 6 or 7 people to get an answer for something, and now it's taking a week to get an answer. And as an SE, you're like, come on, man, like I need these answers yesterday. Why are you doing this to me? So, and then you have your sales guy like, did you answer this guy? Did you answer that guy? I don't know why they sound like that, by the way. They don't all sound like that. But yeah, like it's the bigger the company, the slower it gets. But in the sales world, you're still trying to go as fast as humanly possible. And it's like people holding you back or pushing you forward. So, all right. I think I've spoken more this episode than I've done in a long time. So thanks, Joe, for being here and allowing me to talk during your interview, which is a bad hosting manners. Anyways,
anytime.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it. It's time to move on to the not so fire round, and these are the same 4 questions we ask almost every guest. I think you know them.
You would think, but I think I'm drawing a blank now. I should. I listen to them every week, but
it's all good. That means you might be a little bit more prepared than a lot of guests who are like, you blindsided me with this one. All right, Benny, you want to start us off?
Absolutely, yeah. So again, you shared so much about you moving into the SEing role and into the leadership role as well. What do you love most about it, about being either a sales engineer or otherwise a team lead as part of an SE team?
I mean, I think it is the absolute canned SE answer. I just love talking to people and solving problems, right? Like coming in, they think that there's not something they can necessarily do about this problem, some intractable problem they have. And, coming up with a solution that is elegant, that works for them, that is, inside of our wheelhouse, not going too far to the fringes where we're a little concerned that, we're getting off the beaten path of what we can even necessarily, what we should be selling. And finding that just perfect sweet spot where all of those come together, presenting that to someone, and having them kind of see it and having that aha moment. I was reading on LinkedIn the other day, someone who actually had someone cry after presentation. I've never got to that point where they were so happy that they cried. But I definitely have had these feelings where, you just get to the end of a call with someone or you get to the end of the deal and you just know it clicked. And it is just this feeling that you can't really explain of like, okay, I did it. I solved it. This feeling of accomplishment and all this stuff. And then the great part is, at least in the way that we're set up, then I actually get to pass it off to my friends in launch and implementation who actually have to go do all the things that I said. So I don't actually have to do any of the things that I said, which is one of my personal favorite parts. So you get like all this great part without actually have to doing, most of the work. Not that we tell them that, but
That's funny. I've been in presentations where I cried when it's done. I was just so happy it was over. Benny, you'll get the joke later.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
I'll explain it after. All right. So, what would you change about like the role you've been in leadership and you've been in SE and leadership for almost a year? What have you seen that you would change and make more efficient?
I think one thing that I'm still really trying to sort out. So we're a product-led growth company, right? At Vidyard, we're product-led growth. Yep. We've been doing that, I think, for a couple of years. There's a lot there that I think the kind of standard way that sales engineering works with very much, a demo approach, presenting, all that kind of thing, that can be tweaked for product-led growth companies. And I'm really interested in all those ways that we can start to tweak that. And then also what we can do to scale, right? You can have this great demo, but are you going to scale your SC team as your AE team grows to match? Or what are the other ways that you can kind of scale the power of a sales engineering team without necessarily having to scale the bodies of it? Because obviously, even as, and it's not just a thing of, we don't necessarily want to hire more people. It's, you start to, as you said, as the company starts to grow, it can get harder and harder to communicate that information across the people, right? Having a small team, you can all hop on a call at the end of a day and be like, hey, here's all the things we did today. When you get to, 20 SEs, you can't really do that as easily. So what are the ways that we can take our superpowers as SEs and scale them out without necessarily having to add, the overhead that some of the other things are doing, and kind of where are we going with that? I think there's a lot of interesting conversations I've seen going on around that. But that's kind of the one thing where, when I came in, I kind of thought of it very much as, a standard sales engineering problem to solve of just selling these deals. And I think there's all these other things around it when it comes to scaling teams in, hyper fast scale up, stuff like that. So in the less than 1 year I've been here, our company's grown by 50%. So it's like, you have just different kinds of problems when things need to scale that fast. And I think learning how, what's best in a SE org for that kind of speed and scale, and how you can, get people onboarded fast enough to start delivering value when there's a ton that they need to learn and all those kind of fun things that go with it.
Okay. Nice.
Yeah, that's super cool how you went from just being an SC and just having to I don't know, get familiar with all the nuances of that role just in and of itself, to within that same year now having to kind of get that perspective of the lead, which now kind of introduced that whole conversation of scaling up other team members and I guess working, kind of growing that team on pace or greater than that of the organization and all that. And so again, over just within a year, becoming an SC and then the team lead to have to deal with all that. That's awesome that you've done all that.
Actually, like, have you figured out how to do that? How to scale without scaling?
No, not at all.
Okay.
No.
When you do, do you want to come back on the podcast?
Yeah. When I figure it out, I'll let you know. But so far, I haven't figured it out yet.
Yeah. It'll be interesting chat. Like, and if you want to chat about it offline, you know, I'd be happy to. This is a good. See, that's where sales engineers excel. Like, there's a problem, and now we have to solve it. We don't
exactly. We love solving problems. It's just now it's our own problem. That's
my wife doesn't always enjoy that, but you know, other SEs do.
Mm-mm. Yeah.
You want to take us to the third question, Benny?
Yes, sir. So even just with respect to, you know, your journey of, I guess, becoming a better SC leader, and obviously even just within the context of being an SC, have there been any books, tools, or resources that have kind of helped you along your way and that you continue to use?
So this book, which everyone has, the 6 Habits. Yeah, you have it on the shelf. I can't put it on my shelf because my shelf's too far back. But yeah, the 6 Habits is a great book. Also just picked up The Social Sales Engineer, which is a brand new book, because this is where I want to be doing more of, right? I want to be doing more of that, you know, social media. And okay, you got the book too. One thing I will say about The Social Sales Engineer is that, you probably have every book, so I'm not gonna, this is all I have. I'm done after this one. The interesting thing about Social Sales Engineer, which I would just tell people so they're not surprised when they read it, is that at least parts of it are kind of like a novel. It's not like it's not like a nonfiction book per se, which shocked me a little bit at first, but I'm getting into it. I like it. But when I first read the first chapter, I'm like, wait, what's going on here? I don't know what's going on. But no, both of those books have been awesome. I mean, I think just overall, the thing is now there's so much content out there that you can get, right? Whether it's podcasts like you guys are doing, things like PSC, or even, you know, the content that there's so many companies in the space now which are making content because they play in our space, that I feel like it's like the golden age of, not that I've been in it, so I can't really say it's a golden age, but you know, I've only been in it for a short time, but it definitely feels like this golden age of, you know, we have all the tools we need to talk about all these things. We have all those people like the Chris Whites and John Cares and all that kind of stuff out there who've been around for a while. And we can really start to have conversations with each other and solve all these problems in all these different spaces. So I think definitely, you know, I feel for the people that started 10, 15 years ago when it was like, you know, like your story, Ramsey, where you kind of get into it, you don't even really know what it is. There's no one around to like communicate. It's just, that problem doesn't have to exist for you anymore. There is so many ways you can get help and so many things that you can learn even before you start, right? Like just listening to this podcast alone and all the experts you've had on, I knew all the lingo. I knew, you know, like I'd never worked in sales before. I mean, I did retail sales, but that's not the same as B2B selling, right? So there's just so much stuff now you can get that you can basically have experience before you have experience, because you've seen all these stories from all these other people. So just, you know, if you have a problem, go and look for it, because there will be an answer somewhere, because there is so much content now.
Hey, then like an invite for people, connect with me on LinkedIn or connect with Joel or Benny and ask your questions. The SE community is kind of, I don't know, the best community in the world, and they're always open to answering questions, although Benny doesn't check his LinkedIn, so maybe
once in a while, you know, if you get you win the lottery, the once every 2 months on LinkedIn lottery, you might get me on time.
Yeah.
But
and another thing, like when I started this podcast in 2018, there was nothing. And that's the whole reason I started the podcast, which is, you know, but since then, yeah, so many, not as much as sales. Have like everywhere, but I guess that's a good thing, because, you know, you don't have to read a billion sales blogs. You can just check those few websites and, yeah.
The community is pretty incestuous at that too. I mean, like just speaking to what you were saying earlier around all the different types of people, like it's crazy how like all these different types of people and all these different types of communities have been intertwined one way or another, whether it be like each of the kind of the big wigs jumping on various shows, or people on various shows jumping on other shows, just all within the SEing community. So yeah, no, it's taken me aback how collaborative the entire group has been. And that's been cool.
All right. Last question of the not so fire round. Is there a habit you're working on today to improve in your professional or your personal life?
So I'm going to have a horrible habit, which is super boring, but my habit is getting rid of my filler words. Because now that I've talked to people about it and I've started watching myself, the filler words, you don't realize them when you're saying them, but when you start to watch it back, you're like, it really does make a difference when you can cut those out. And so, yeah, I think it's a super boring thing. If anyone has great ideas of how to do that, hit me up on LinkedIn, because I'm still looking. I think I do have a couple apps which are supposed to help me, but then I'm too busy every day and I never get to the app. But that's the current thing. I have definitely not cracked the nut on how I'm going to do that one, but that is the main, although it is super boring, the main thing that I am currently working on is how to up that smoothness of my talking.
For what it's worth, I think. Oh, sorry, go ahead there, Ramsey.
I was just thinking, now I'm thinking we should get someone like who's a speech person, I don't know, speech trainer or something, to come and have this chat just to talk about these little things. Not many people care though. Like if you're in a meeting with like 5 people in there, it's more of a conversation, less of a speech.
Yes. I think it's a thing that bugs yourself much more when you notice it than bugs anyone else.
Yeah. And like you're in a world where you do videos, like you record videos.
Yes.
Which is very different from having a conversation with people.
Yes.
So, and you get to see it. Like I'm editing my videos, I'm crying most of the time. Like, why did I say that? I'm saying 13, it sounds like 30. Why does my 13 sound like 30? And like I put it on my last YouTube video, it's like 13, Randy, you dummy. Like I have it on my video just like to punish myself. And that's one way I'm using it to learn. Like self-punishment tends to work for me. I don't know, Benny, yes. I cut you off.
No, it's okay. I mean, just on the self-punishment thing, I was thinking if I were to ever have my own like workout room in my house, I think I would have like gym. I'd have pictures of just like, I don't know, the body with a lot of fat in it, just to like tell myself or to motivate myself, like, no, Benny, like you're going to turn into this if you don't do stuff. But anyways, that's aside the point. I was going to say
a picture, Benny. He'll turn into me.
Yeah, no. I think you're already in better shape than the picture I'd be aiming for. But just with respect to the speech thing, like I think you've made strides. Obviously, like continue on. I guess for either of you, like I think you're both, like you sound both very good. And even just kind of in your response there, Joel, I think I only heard 2 ums there, which considering how long, like that wasn't really that much at all. Something that I found helped, and I'm not good at it either per se, but I did find that it did help a little bit, was that a pause here and there, like just to kind of replace that with a pause. As awkward as that may seem to kind of have that pause, it does come off okay. I don't know if you've heard that before, but
there's a lot of power in awkward pauses. And there's a lot of power even in calls with pauses, right? There's nothing quite like just letting that dead air be there and not talking, even when you could be, because the ideal, right, that I've seen is you leave that pause and then the prospect starts talking to each other and they start selling themselves, right? And that's when, like you just kind of put the thing out there, you just let it sit, and then they start talking about how this is going to solve their problem. And the conversation they're having is so much better than the conversation you'd have with them because they know the problem so much better. And you don't get that if you keep jumping in and keep, asking a follow-up question. Don't put those pauses there. So I think, for me, I'm also a pretty fast talker. So that's the other kind of part of that is learning to slow down, leave those pauses, be short, and just, you don't have to get through 50 minutes of demo in a 1-hour phone call. You can get through 10 minutes of really solid gold. And that's okay. That's probably, in fact, better. Agreed. And that's, I think, kind of the other side of that part.
So that was an amazing tip. I just have another tip to add on to it. If you're on a call with a salesperson, or whether it's the salesperson or the SE trying to implement that pause, make sure that your counterpart knows it, because if they don't, they tend to try to fill in the pause.
Yeah, you definitely have to be on the same page on that one.
Like I've seen it. I've done it. Like I ask a question, and there's a pause, and then someone would jump in and answer it from my side. I'm like, why are you like? I already knew the answer. I just want to see how they answer it again.
Fair enough. I would even think for the pause itself too, like not even necessarily one of those pauses like for an effect like that, but even if you're thinking of what word to say next in a sentence, even just within your own sentence, even if you're talking quickly, a pause instead of an is kind of nice because they're waiting on every bated breath that you take essentially. So if you kind of pause instead of saying the next words out of your mouth are going to be that much more, or at least from their perspective, will be that much more well thought out, and they'll just kind of patiently wait. And I think that word is far more profound if it comes after a pause versus, or sentence or phrase or whatever. It's far more profound if it follows a pause versus if it follows the shit. And yeah, it's just one of those things. It's tough to work on, but I found a few times I do actually do it. It actually sounds all right.
All right. So now when I go post the podcast episode, I'm gonna have to say not clean just because of Benny swearing the last second of the show. Sorry. It's all good. All right, Joel. It's a good time to hang this up. This has been great. If people want to reach out and connect with you, where can they do that?
So LinkedIn is definitely a great place. I am not one to be on, the Twitter or any of those kinds of places. So LinkedIn would be the spot. Hopefully by the time you get to me, I will be posting more. I actually have an OKR to post more because I do want to get that, social aspect going. So hit me up on LinkedIn and then call me out if I don't post things because I should be. And yeah, you can just find me on LinkedIn.
Your OKR? How many posts per week or per month?
Yeah, so we have, this is actually something you and I talked about before. We have a very progressive marketing department who actually runs a contest to have us post on LinkedIn and get engagement. And there's a whole point system. So my OKR is actually based around scoring a certain number of points per week, which basically is to do with, the number of people that engage and all that stuff. So if you can come to my LinkedIn, comment, share, it will help me reach my OKR, which would be greatly appreciated. But I will also try and put actual good content that you actually want to comment, and share.
Tag me if you want me to.
I will tag you, and then you can come in and go for it. I did go on a streak there, and if you come find me on LinkedIn, go back a couple weeks, and I went on a tear of posting SE memes. So go look for those.
So here's the thing: I haven't seen any single one of them. I'm always on LinkedIn, and LinkedIn doesn't show when you have a lot of connections, which I'm lucky enough to have because of the podcast. I don't see a lot of the posts that are there. So a tip for you, I guess, Joel, if you want people to see it, tag those people.
Yes.
Ask a question, tag those people, say what they think, and that puts them on the spot, and they kind of have to answer.
They have to answer. Yeah, exactly.
I don't use.
Yeah, you can go look me up on LinkedIn and find the post that I tagged Chris White in, because I have a meme that has Chris White tagged in it because it is a Chris White themed meme.
Okay,
so
is it
that's everyone's homework. No, it's not about a shovel, but I actually was thinking of the other day I had to put in my above ground pool and I had to hand under the 18-foot pool. And the whole time I did it, I had Chris in my head that I don't want the shovel, I want the pool, and I don't even want the pool, I want to float around in the pool. So yeah, thanks Chris for that I was thinking of you the entire time I was dying in the heat shoveling this 18-foot hole in the ground for my pool.
Yeah, I can see a lot of memes on your thing. Chris White, this one goes out to you. Okay, all right, now your demo on I'm tested click. Awesome. Yes.
Yeah, so go hit that one up. If you're not watching, well, you can't even see it on the video, so go find it. Go hit me up on LinkedIn and you can find the Chris White themed meme.
Awesome. All right, man. Well, I appreciate your time, Joel, and I hope to talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks guys. It was great.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Joel, for coming on. Thank you for listening. I appreciate it. I would love to hear your takeaway from this show. I mean, we talked about a lot of things, Benny, Joel, and I really enjoyed the conversation. I want to know what you found useful on this show, so it'll help me for upcoming shows. And if you think this show has been useful, I would urge you to share it with at least one person that it will be useful for. So enough begging for this week. I will talk to you next time. With that, this is Ramsey signing off.